And we are live now. Good morning and good evening, depending on the respective time zones. My name is Sarah Rahaman Shaikh, and I am an English honors student of Ranibilla Girls College under Calcutta University. I welcome you to the stories of tribal identity and culture that will explore the role of tribal art and tribal representation in art in shaping cultural identity and ideology, curated under TMYS Review June 2024 in collaboration with the Center for Asia Pacific Initiatives, University of Victoria. We are calling for the submission of essays, poems, and short stories under the project. To know more about the submission guidelines and the project architecture, please visit www.tellmeyourstory.biz. Today, I consider myself very privileged to be in the company of our esteemed panelists, Amit Arjel, Tricia Ellen, and Shomil Shah, who will shortly share their views and insights with us. The topic for today's discussion is body art, tattoo, influencing the spread of tribal culture in urban fashion under the subtheme tribal representation in art. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce our speakers. Our first speaker for the session is Amit Arjel. Tattoo artist Amit Arjel is an ethnographer committed to work on Indian indigenous Godna tattoo culture. Based out of Delhi, Amit's work has been published and aired at Nat Geo, Euronews Culture, Meghalaya Times to its credits. His search for an indigenous tattoo artist 8 years ago was the starting point of his efforts to identify the remnants of Godna culture. He realized his calling and purpose to fill in the gaps and serve as a link between modernity and a fading culture. He is still recording every nuance pertaining to tribal symbols, their significance to the culture, and his need for knowledge. We are delighted to have you on the panel, sir. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for taking us in this panel.
Our second speaker for the session is Tricia Ellen. Tricia Ellen has been documenting the revival tattooing in the Pacific since completing her master's degree at the University of Hawaii in 1992. Her work has taken her to Tahiti and the Society Islands, the Marquesas Islands, Samoa, Aotearoa, that is the New Zealand, New Caledonia, the Cook Islands, Palau, and Rapa Nui, that is the Easter Island. Ellen's books, Tattoo Traditions of Hawaii in 2005 and The Polynesian Tattoo Today in 2010, have received national acclaims. Her articles and photographs have appeared in dozens of newspapers, magazines, and journals and conference publications. Ellen is also an accomplished tattooist, having tattooed well over 8,000 individuals, which gives her rare insights into the meanings and motivations behind the tattoos worn by islanders today. We are delighted to have you on the panel, ma'am. Thank you for joining us this evening.
Thank you.
Our third speaker for the session is Shomil Shah. Shomil Shah is a Mumbai-based hand-poke tattoo artist who runs the India Ink Archive, a crowdsourced tattoo archive on Instagram, which aims to collect, document, and make accessible what remains of this ancient art form through personal research and user-submitted content of indigenous tattoo art form from the Indian subcontinent. Tattooing has provided him with a deeper connection to his roots. His great grandmother was the last traditionally tattooed member. He began documenting an ever expanding catalogue of motifs and designs from across the peninsula, which he respectfully tattoos on his clients, while also sharing with them their origin, meaning, and significance. We are delighted to have you on the panel, sir. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Sarah. Looking forward to it.
We will now open the forum for discussion. I would request Amit Arjel to share his insights. Sir, over to you now.
Well, that's me. I was thinking, hoping to listen first, but that's okay. I'll go on, no worry. Yeah. So basically, how I started my journey is Indian tribal. Being a tattoo artist, I always wanted to, collect information about all the indigenous tattoo culture in from our, tradition, Indian tradition, more of the interior side. And when I was looking to it, I couldn't find any such artist, who've been doing very deeper. So that's how that got me interest to just go and see the tribes and authentically. So that's the thing. Like what I actually do is like, when I see any kind of motive or Indian traditional motive, I try to find the origin of that motive, and then the village, and then the artist. So that's how I do, authentify the significance of the tribal, tattoo heritage and culture. So yeah.
Uh, so, what are your views on the topic tattoo art influencing the spread of tribal culture in urban fashion? What do you think? What are your personal views on it?
Uh, Actually, it's basically, I can say like, it's a personal interest of individuals. Okay, like, but the thing is, like we were doing, just to take everybody, just to know that how Indian tribal culture are rich actually, because the thing is like how it's getting lost because of nobody is willing to take it, willing to do the way they are doing it. And that's how, like, when we approach to like individuals in urban countries, they actually like it. They were always surprised, like, I haven't seen this kind of motif before, and the meaning was like amazing. So that's how they always get interest to get a tattoo on it. you know when we know the actual meaning and when we tell to the people, they actually get excited to get a tattoo. That's the gap between tribes and the urban country. If we fill that gap, maybe the tribal artists can also get the opportunity to do a traditional tattoo in urban cities. So that's the gap, we have to fill it, and we have to work on that.
That's really true, sir. When it comes to your experience, did you ever imparted this knowledge to any of your client? And what was the reaction? How did you imparted knowledge? We would love to know about it.
Yeah, so whenever we go for like Indian tribal tattoo, I always explain every each and motive meaning, and how this tradition came from, like how the way they do. I always tell the story behind the motive which the traditional artist told me. Exact the same way I portray to my client as well. That's how they got like interested to getting the Indian tribal tattoo. So the actual meaning, like when we tell the people like this is the motives stand for, the feelings behind the sacrifice women did to just embed the tattoo. And even like some of the Indian tribe, they actually believe that tattoo is a immortal jewelry. So how it's become a immortal jewelry, right? So that's the story. When we tell to the client, they get excited, like they hear something that they never heard of it. And actually those of the story, they actually, because of that, they actually want to get the tattoo, like, oh, I want to tell this story to the other as well. So once they got the tattoo, then they can tell the story. So that's the thing. It's actually excite me about Indian tribe. When we do it, when we, even while we doing a tattoo, we share the story about how I went to the tribe. What's the motive meaning, how they do it before, now how we are doing it now. So these whole story create like such an aura to do a traditional tattoo.
So, if you don't mind, can you please share one of the stories with us too, with the audience?
Yeah. So one of my clients, she came to get a tattoo, but she had no idea like what kind of motif she want. And but she always want to get the Indian tribal tattoo. So so I choose Baiga tribe tattoo. So she told me like she wanna have a one feminine energy motive, and Baiga tribe is all about feminine energy. Like there is no such male tattoo in that tribe. Only the female domination tribe it is. So I have chosen one symbol which is actually called like uh, it's actually a goddesses of fertility, and they have like it's called Pothi. And when I tell about the story, like how they get this symbol and what is the meaning behind, like people used to actually believe that once you get this tattoo, you can invest the energy to have a child. And while the session, you have the courage to just take care of your child and everything. And she got super emotional with that concept, because she was going through that phase, and she connect with that tattoo. And she was like, now I want that one only because I can connect. This is my story. So people actually do connect with the tribal story, which is like ancient. you know it's not that we have made it just now. It's ancient things, and how still people connecting with those feelings. So this is such a thing that tribal always have, and it will never gonna fade. It's just that tribal people, they are actually living it the traditional way of doing tattoo, sadly. But we have to do something. Like, that's why we are actually doing this research to show the people, show the world that this is the culture we had always.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, sir, for your insightful observations. Now, I would
Yeah.
like to request Tricia Ellen to share her insights. Ma'am, over to you now.
Okay, I'm very dependent on imagery. So let me see if I can share my screen and open a PowerPoint. Tattooing is such a visual art that I find it difficult to talk about tattoos without having images here. Um,
We can see the screen, ma'am.
okay, very good. Now, if I were to go to the full presentation, will that come through okay? Because, well, let's try it. And I apologize, I'm not familiar with this particular application. No, I don't see you now. Can you see me?
No problem, ma'am. We can see the screen and we can see you as well.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
very good.
Yes, yes.
So I am primarily a tattoo artist. I
Mhm.
started in 1991, 92, and I really began tattooing in order to take it back to Rapa Nui, or Easter Island. I'd been writing to a number of historians and people there, asking them if anyone was currently tattooing. And there were people that were seriously interested in the history, but nobody that was doing tattoos. People were hand poking themselves with a sewing needle and thread. Um, so, anyway, I learned to tattoo specifically for that. And because I was at the University of Hawaii, we have access to one of the best libraries in the world on Pacific history. So I was making copies of a lot of old manuscripts and books that I knew they wouldn't have access to on the island. And a lot of these had images of tattoo, traditional Rapa Nui tattoo. So anyway, that's how I got into this. And I never thought that it would take over my life. But it certainly has. It's been, boy, 30 odd years now. Um,
Wow.
and you mentioned, I've written a couple of books, The Polynesian Tattoo Today, which is the second book, and Tattoo Traditions of Hawaii. Now, in my mind, Tattoo Traditions of Hawaii is by far the most important because it's historical. It has a fairly complete compilation of all of the early passages and early illustrations. Now, I can't say complete. You notice I said fairly complete because there's always a chance that some original old drawings are in museum archives that just haven't been cataloged yet, or that they're in private collections. So the Hawaii book is the one that's really full of the history. And then the second half of the book is Tattooed Hawaiians Today and Tattoo Artists. How the second book came about is a lot of people wanted to be included, but they didn't want to write. And I don't interview because I don't want to control what they say. I want them to say what they're comfortable sharing. And by doing a real interview, it directs that. So leaving it wide open like that, a lot of tattooed individuals and tattoo artists weren't comfortable, even though I said, I have permission to show you samples of other people's entries and I'll edit it for you. And then you can see my edit to approve it. So anyway, the second book about Polynesian tattoo today came about because so many people wanted to be published, wanted their work included, but just didn't want to write. So it simply has brief captions, and then there's 24 artists that are included, and they have a statement about how they got into it and what their priorities are and whatever they wanted to share. So I'll move on. This is myself tattooing a gentleman on Rapa Nui in 1992. I asked all of the local people design something Rapa Nui. And some of them wanted modern stuff, and I said, no, designs Rapa Nui. Now, Rapa Nui is governed by Chile, so it's Spanish speaking, and I can kind of get by in Spanish, but not terribly well. So anyway, I gave it surgical markers to everybody and let them draw on themselves and draw on each other. And, you know, a surgical marker will last a few days. So after a couple of days, I'd say, pointed at tattoo and say, le gusta, do you like it? And then tattoo right over their own drawings. And they were petroglyph images, images from ancient tattoos, images from the wooden carvings, and that sort of thing. So it was really fun, and I got to tattoo in some great places, including the dentist's office and the hospital. And but of course, I'm based in Hawaii, and being at the University of Hawaii, I would document the tattoo traditions and catalog all of the early images from anywhere in the Pacific. So what we see here on the left is an original drawing by an artist, Jacques Arago, in Hawaii in 1819.
Excuse me, ma'am. Sorry to interrupt. Can you please like double click it so that we can understand? The picture comes on the main feed.
Oh, okay.
We can only see the first page.
Oh, I can't see what you're seeing. Did it advance?
We can see the first page of the slide. If you click the second slide, then we will be able to see the second slide.
I've now clicked onto the third slide. Are they not advancing? Okay.
Yeah, we cannot see the third slide. I guess if you click it, then we will be able to see it.
Okay, I have clicked it. It's showing on my screen.
Okay.
You can't see it on yours?
Then there's some problem. Not an issue, because we can see the slide. It's just in the small sizes.
Oh, well,
the left-hand side.
The other method. Can you see this one? It's two gentlemen, an old drawing on the left, and a modern Hawaiian gentleman there on the right. Can you see that?
Yes. It's just in the small frame, that's all. That's the only problem.
Maybe we can, should we try and, okay, I'm trying to quit this and to go back to the standard presentation, and let's see if we can improve this. Because...
Yeah, we can see it now, ma'am. Yes, we can see it now.
Okay,
yes,
very good. The other way, they show up much bigger on my screen. But so anyway, here on the left is an original drawing from 1819 of a tattooed Hawaiian. And it's important that they're originals because every time these drawings were published, the publishers had to hire engravers to create new plates. And these engravers often made changes in the tattoos. Sometimes they eliminated tattoos or embellished them. And there on the right is a very prominent Hawaiian gentleman. And you can see that his leg tattoo is much the same. So many Hawaiians today are taking their tattoos from these old sources. Here's another example. of an early drawing on the left by the same artist, 1819. And you could see that he has a checkerboard pattern on his chest, which is a woven pattern, called sometimes a makaloa pattern. And then the tattoo on the right, and most of these tattoos are ones I've done. This is a gentleman who chose this pattern. This particular pattern marks completion, moving on to a new phase. It can symbolize death or someone passing or your past. And he took this when his grandmother passed in memory of her. It's also a binding pattern because it is a weaving pattern. So it signifies that binding together, that strength and unity. Okay. Now we've moved on to the Marquesas, and the Marquesas is what I wrote my thesis on. And I visited the Marquesas 7 times, and total spent cumulatively about 18 months there. I wrote my thesis on the accuracy of these early drawings. This there on the left was done in 1803, the first Russian voyage around the world. And you can see that Marquesans were tattooed head to toe. This took 7 years to complete and was quite a lengthy process. And the gentleman here on the right, his name is Ro'onui. This photo was taken in 93 or 94. He now works in tattoos in Canada. But he's a tattooist, and I met him when he was working on the island of Mo'orea in the Society Islands or the Tahitian Islands. Now we'll move on to Samoa. Samoa is one of the few places in the Pacific that has a continual history of tattooing. Every place else, it was a dead art for 150, 200 years in some cases. But the Samoan man's tattoo, that is the tattoo that goes from waist to just below the knees that you see here on the lower body, has been practiced all along. On the right is an early photograph, and on the left, a gentleman today. What he's wearing and the staff he's holding are marks of his status within their culture. And then he has more contemporary designs, still with a Samoan influence on his chest and arm. There has been innovation in Samoan tattooing. The taulima, or the armband, got incredibly popular with the Peace Corps. They would call these pisikawa tattoos, which is their way of saying, or kind of Samoanizing the words Peace Corps. So bands got quite popular, and today a lot of people are doing full arms like you see there on the right, using Samoan patterns in a way that's still somewhat in line with the traditional tattoo, but a modern placement. And that particular piece is done by another artist, Jacqueline Sporl, who's a phenomenal tattooist and is in Switzerland. Here's an old drawing of a Maori tattoo. Now we've moved on to Aotearoa, or New Zealand. And I'm showing you these just so you have an idea of what the traditional tattoos look like. So this is called the puhoro, and it's, again, from the waist to just below the knees, primarily worn by men, but also by women. And then, of course, Maori people also had the facial moko, or the mataora, they call it today, the living face. The gentleman's there on the left, and the woman, it's usually limited to the chin and to the lips. Now, that had not been practiced in some time. Women were tattooed clear up through the 1950s, but the men's facial tattoo fell out of practice by about, 1860 or so. Recently, both have been revived. The top image there is a friend of mine named Vic Biddle, who unfortunately is no longer with us. And then these two women that you see in the lower image, Julie there on the left is a moko practitioner, a tattoo artist. And then Linda Mum is there in the center. Linda's the one that designed the Maori flag. And they're both wearing the moko kauwai, the chin tattoo. Now we've moved on to the Marshall Islands, which is technically just outside of Polynesia, but it's kind of important to see what's happening there. There on the left is the old illustration by an artist named Louis Corris, who was there in 1816. And there on the right is an example of what individuals are getting today. Now, this revival only started very recently, probably 10 years ago or less. So it's very recent that Marshallese people are starting to get this tattoo again. It's nice to see it practiced since it hadn't been in a long time. Here on the left is another drawing by Corris, 1816, of the woman's tattoo. And this is another one that's just been recently completed within the last decade. Now we'll move on to innovation. And, well, not quite. One more slide. Here we are on the island of Yap. And actually, the island of Feist in the state of Yap. Yap is in the northwest Pacific, quite a ways outside of Polynesia, but they still have very strong tattoo traditions. And the reason I chose this one is the traditional tattoo from Yap was very influential in the start of the whole tribal tattoo movement in Europe and in America in the late 80s. Here in the center, you can see an elderly gentleman. I believe this photo was taken in 1972 by a friend, Don Rubenstein, who spent a good deal of time there getting to know the last tattooed individuals. And there, Jeremy, there on the left, is from Yap, but he now lives on the Big Island in Hawaii and in Hilo. And Jeremy was the first one in 80 years to get the full body tattoo from Yap. And one of my apprentices did this. I live on the wrong island, I couldn't have. But Rodney Powell, or Nee, is the tattooist that did this. He started with a machine, and then he finished it with traditional tapping tools, not poking tools. And then there on the right, some of you might recognize that image. That's a well-known tattooist, Leo Zulueta. And Leo, in the late 80s, was heavily inspired by these designs, by the Yappies tattoo in particular, and had it done on his back. And apparently he was joking with Ed Hardy, who's a very well-known, famous tattooist. And they were saying, what would we call this if it really takes off and gets popular? And they came up with New Tribal. So that's where the New Tribalism phrase came from. And this back piece got very popular among a number of individuals in America and elsewhere, but it was taken totally out of context. They weren't even aware that it was a traditional design from Yap. But this really springboarded the whole tribal movement in America. That is the barbed wire type tattoos and that style, the heavy black, which really is pretty far removed from the traditional cultures. Now, some very talented artists have been inspired by this and come up with some new creations. This is Jacqueline's work again in Switzerland, and it's really a beautiful design. It certainly isn't really in line with any of the ancient art, which is probably good, being that he is an outsider and not part of these cultures, but you can definitely see that influence from Yap here. And Polynesian influenced tattoos have gotten huge, incredibly popular worldwide. There's a fantastic tattooist in St. Petersburg, Russia, named Dmitry Babakin, who does beautiful, huge body pieces on all of these people in Russia, which I just find surprising because I rarely get the chance to do big body work like that, yet all of these people in Russia are wanting it. So it has become a worldwide phenomenon. These are two of my pieces, and where we're at really today with Polynesian tattooing is this hybrid style that combines numerous elements from various Polynesian cultures, sometimes even Japanese cultures. The gentleman there on the right is from Japan. His name is Akira, and he's lived in Hawaii for a long time and is very involved here with canoeing and other cultural practices. So he got his Japanese mon, or that name crest, in the middle of his chest, but it's surrounded by Polynesian designs. Innovation is really kind of essential to art. So as an artistic practice, it's totally acceptable to blend styles, to come up with new motifs, new treatments. What you see here on the right is hand poked by Corey Ferguson, at least the bottom part, his dot work. Corey does primarily use a machine, but you can see Marquesan motifs that are done there in the gray, and then the heavy black above it. So it's really innovative and very beautiful, but not true to traditional or tribal design. Similarly, here on the left, it's a beautiful Maori-inspired piece on the top, and then the bottom and that diagonal band are much more Samoan. So we do find some really fun, creative pan-Polynesian styles blending the various island groups. That today is by far the most popular. It's somewhat rare to see somebody wearing a truly traditional Hawaiian tattoo or a tattoo that's strictly Marquesan or Tahitian. Samoan more so, that knees to waist coverage doesn't vary much. That's kind of a standard. But this pan-Polynesian hybrid style is definitely the most popular. If we look at fashion in clothing, tattoo has had an influence, very definitely. Oh, this pop-up's going to come up from time to time.
Internet, Wi-Fi.
Okay.
Power's gone.
Some of you may have heard about the Nike incident. Nike came up with these leggings that did get pulled off the market. There was a petition that had 750 names, and people were offended, thinking that it was too similar to a Samoan tattoo. Personally, I don't think so. If we see the two side by side, there on the right is the Samoan man's pea, or the knees to waist tattoo, and there on the left is the Nike leggings. And the design motifs are somewhat similar, and the triangular shapes, but beyond that, the similarity kind of ends there. And the majority of the people that were signing this petition it was spread around on Facebook, and it was largely in New Zealand, not in Samoa. Social media has had a huge impact on tattoo styles, clothing styles. It's brought about more hybridization of tattoo styles, which we can talk a little bit more about. There's one more image from Samoa. And some of the artists in Samoa have gotten very innovative. But again, that's acceptable if we view this as an art form. And anthropologists often say that culture isn't something that's frozen in time 200 years ago. Culture is alive. It's dynamic. It's not intended to be stagnant. Now, the Samoan pea that you just saw in the last slide on the right hasn't changed much. They really don't feel at liberty to change that. It would be really frowned upon. But the piece here on the left was done by Su'asuluape Pataloaliava'a, is his full title name, who is one of the tattoo masters that's from a long lineage of tattoo artists, or Tufunga is the Samoan word for a tattoo master. And the image here on the right is very innovative. It's using designs from the Samoan woman's tattoo. And this again is done by Jacqueline in Switzerland. And really a beautiful piece. Using traditional designs, as is the one on the left, but in modern placement. Oh, what's happening here? We have a blank slide or two. Okay, I'll go back there. No. Okay, something isn't showing. We can't really talk about tattooing without talking about textiles, in particular tapa, which is bark cloth. This is the tree, the paper mulberry that it's made from. And here's the process. You soak and beat the bark till it's very thin, like a cloth, and then it's decorated. This is Samoan, as is this. And this is an ancient practice. These pieces of textile had a lot of symbolism in traditional culture, besides just being worn. The motifs basically find their origins in nature. There are things like the tracks of a bird, a centipede, the sharp edges of a pandanus leaf, things like that, a coiled shellfish. And tapa is usually made in groups and decorated in groups. It's a community effort and is very an integral part of the community. It is only made by women. There's an old drawing of women. And sometimes it's painted, sometimes it's stenciled. This is Tongan, and you can see their hand painting it here. And this is how it was traditionally worn. This is probably turn of the century, the last century, not this one. And there's more image. Whoops, did we skip one? No, actually what this is doing is it's showing my hidden slides. So I'll move quickly through these. This is another Tongan piece. And this is also Tongan, as is this. Now we've moved to Fiji. High status individuals in Fijian culture will wrap themselves with literally meters and meters and meters of Fijian tapa to show their rank. And there's a small modern piece there on the left. Here is an old illustration of a chief wearing meters of tapa and some women wearing tapa. Here we're in Papua New Guinea. They also make tapa. And in Papua New Guinea, the facial tattoo that you see there in the upper right, which is really worn by the women, as were the body tattoos, reflects the same patterns that you see in their tapa. So there is an awful lot of overlap with tattooing. And we're nearly done here. And this is traditional Fijian tapa being worn. This is probably about the 1940s or 50s. More Fijian tapa. Also Fijian. Fijian tapa is stenciled, not painted. More modern usage of Fijian tapa skirts. Hawaiian tapa. Hawaiian tapa is often stamped with the patterns rather than being painted directly on it. Here's the bamboo carved stamps. And there are some of the patterns. This is that Papua New Guinea one again. These are supposed to be hidden. I'm going to skip some of these because we certainly don't need them all. Okay, we'll do it here. And tapa is still used today, sometimes in a very traditional context, sometimes in a more modern way. This is a bridal party, all wearing tapa. Same here. This is Tongan. And the modern beauty competitions and stuff that like Miss Tahiti and so on that have been held in the various islands often incorporate tapa into some very fun and innovative styles like this. And a young woman painting them. Now it's often used for commercial purposes instead of tourists, as you see here. Today, there's a number of individuals here in Hawaii that are creating beautiful clothing lines and fashion with traditional tattoo motifs. Now, the bulk of it is again a hybrid. They're not sticking to any particular given style. These pieces are a company called Wahine Toa, which means woman warrior, and there is the woman warrior herself, Nita Pelago, who started the company, and her son is a tattoo artist. They mostly do craft fairs and pop-up shows. They don't sell commercially to any retailers. There's another one in the Cook Islands. Eleanor Tavioni started Tav Creations probably 40 years ago now. And they're all hand block printed clothing. They're very highly desired. It's kind of the designer of the Pacific. But if we go shopping, we'll find a lot of this online. This mass commercialization has really happened in the last decade. To where there's websites all over the place showing Polynesian-inspired clothing and fashion. Here's a hat that was on Amazon that actually I might order. A t-shirt. Now, this t-shirt is very true to Hawaiian design, but the bulk of what we're seeing isn't. There's some pretty inappropriate mixes in some cases. T-shirts, of course, are popular.
So sorry to interrupt you, ma'am. We are just running out a little bit of time. So if you could...
we have 2 more slides. So
sure, ma'am, sure. It's so
shoes.
Interesting, actually. Yes, ma'am, sure.
Yeah. Okay, so that's all I could say about your first topic. That is tattoo, tribal tattoo, and its reflection and influence on fashion. So let's move on. And I can quit this. Stop sharing. There we go. Okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your insightful observation. It was a fascinating and intriguing presentation. Now I would like to request Shomil Shah to share his insights. So over to you now.
Yeah, hi there. Yeah, it's been a great pleasure listening to both Tricia and Amit, and yeah, thank you for inviting me on this panel. I guess my journey, also sorry, I might have slight technical issues with the internet, so I do apologize in advance. And in case you can't hear me clearly, just let me know.
Sure, sir.
Yeah. Yeah, so I guess my journey into tattooing and particularly traditional Indian tattooing started just over 5 years ago when I started hand poking myself. I just bought a DIY kit online while I was living in London. And as soon as I kind of started that, my mum told me how her grandmom, so my family is originally from Kutch in Gujarat. So my great grandmother, she had these tattoos on her neck and on her arm. And unfortunately, there are no photographs that really show it. But my mom had these really vivid memories of her grandmother's tattoos, her motiba's tattoos. And so when she described that to me, I was completely kind of surprised and amazed that tattooing existed in my family, because for 2 generations it had completely been skipped, and I had a vague idea of traditional tattoos in India. So I went online trying to find out more information, and there were bits and pieces about kind of tattoos from some of the tribes in Kutch, like the Rabaris, who are the most famous. And then also kind of noticed that actually tattooing existed in South India, in Northeast India, in North India. So that just got me really fascinated. And unfortunately, the information that was there was just very minimal. It just kind of skimmed on the surface, and just kind of you kept seeing the same photographs again of Rabari women, or the Todas, or kind of the northeastern states as well. And so I just kind of kept digging and digging, and Eventually found some old books. When the British were here, they went around the land documenting it. So there's some records of tattoos as well, but it just didn't seem to cover, um, the length and breadth of the country. So that kind of started about 5 years ago. I continued my practice as a hand poke artist, um, and I got more and more interested, especially in the tattoos that came from Kutch. So through my own research online and in person, I kind of slowly started building a catalog of motifs. And I would always, I think once you sort of start noticing something, then you constantly see it everywhere you go. So particularly when I would be in India and kind of going to the markets and things, I noticed typically elder women would have these amazing kind of faded, slightly spread out green blue markings on their arms. And slowly I'd pick up the courage to go and talk to them, show them my tattoos, kind of engage in a conversation about their tattoos. And most often they've always been very, very happy to share the information on their tattoos, and they're actually quite pleased that someone's noticed them or is looking at them or interested in them even. um, and if they were comfortable, then I would photograph it, take some whatever information they could remember about it and just make a note of it for myself. And I started sharing this on my Instagram feed. And I noticed, it was really kind of causing a lot of engagement. Like so many people would message me and be like, "Wow, that's so cool! Never knew this existed," or "Oh wow, this looks exactly like the tattoo that my grandmother had," or "This looks like the tattoo that my nana had." Um, and so a lot of people started really engaging with that. And eventually people started sending me photographs as well, photographs of people in their family who had these tattoos, or photographs of people that they've come across on their travels, or, people who they worked with. So, again, just through Instagram, I would just constantly keep posting these things. It helped me get a little bit more understanding of just the variety of tattoos. Almost every region in India had a rich history of tattooing. Sadly, over the last two generations or three generations, with colonization, with urbanization, this went on a very steady decline. And tattooing has always been an oral tradition, especially here. It was, passed down just from family members to family members. So nothing was ever really documented or written or drawn out, except for just very few bits and pieces. Um, so yeah, it kind of really made me start to realize that the only tattoos I now saw in this style were on women typically over 50, 60, 70 years of age. And when they got these tattoos, they were quite young, sometimes as young as 8 or 10 or 15. And when you're that young and you're getting tattooed, you sometimes don't remember the meanings of what these tattoos were, especially if you're not carrying it on to your kids. Then you kind of lose the memory, you lose the meaning of what these tattoos were. So most often when I ask these women what their tattoos mean, they're like, "Oh, it's jewelry, oh, it's decoration." They'll know maybe this is a flower motif or this is a scorpion motif, but a lot of the symbols are sort of getting lost in their meaning. And this really kind of made me sad that, are we at the risk of losing a whole, um, kind of information on this whole style of tattooing and what it meant and what it signified. And so, I kind of carried on with my practice, with this always happening in the background just for my own interest. And then I could call it a shower epiphany, but I think one day I sort of realized that as much as I'd love to travel the length and breadth of this country to document it all, it would probably take me at least a few lifetimes to do that. And since people were anyway kind of sending me a lot of content and constantly sharing my work and sending me more work and more information, I decided that maybe the best way to harness social media and a platform like Instagram is to create a crowdsourced archive, so that people, whenever they come across something, whether it's in their family or on the streets, they can send me as much information they have about that um, image or that person, and then we just you know put it all online, and then so that eventually there's something, a resource there for anyone who's interested to go to find out a little bit more about their culture, whether it's very specific to a certain region of, say, Tamil Nadu, or it's just a broader interest in tattoos from, say, north of India. So that's how India Ink Archive came about. So I started that page about 2 years ago. And it's been amazing to see how that's just grown very organically. um, and and most often it gets more engagement than my own personal tattooing page, and actually that makes me quite happy that that there's more interest there, because I think that's the thing that's really worth preserving and documenting. And there's amazing other tattoo artists and enthusiasts out there who are also doing a great job documenting. Like Amit's doing an amazing job documenting all of the tattooing traditions, particularly in the north of India. There's Mo Naga, who's really worked, over a decade in the northeast. And there's so many other people out there. So it's really all just come together, I think, with the help and interests of all of us, really.
Beautiful, sir. Actually, it's a great initiative by each and every one of you to keep the spirit of tattoos alive and not let it fade over time. Great initiative. Thank you so much, sir, to share your insightful observations. Now, I would like to move on to the question and answer session. The first question is for Amit Arjel. Sir, are there distinct motifs or symbols in Godna tattoos that hold significant cultural meanings? And how are these incorporated into urban fashion?
Yeah, so there are, in fact, in Indian tribe, we talk about it. There are lot of, in fact, the tribe and the motive we have. But I'm gonna talk about like very few. Like if we talk about like Urao tribe, which is in, like part of Chhattisgarh. So they have like very interesting motive, which is they earn it basically. They fought with the foreigner, you know, and three times, and they win actually. So that's how they got three lines of victory, and they got it as a tattoo form. So that is how like that symbolizes came, and it has a very strong meaning, and that actually we don't have a documentation as Shomil said. We always have a word of mouth things, oral thing. So that's why like when we do when we go to that place, we research. That's how we are doing it now. We are documenting it so that people can know about those things, and eventually like they can respectfully get it from urban cities. When we tell them this is happened, and now we have a motive, and that motive is authentically because now we have an image as well. When we saw some old woman having those tattoos, so now we have a proof, now we have a meaning, now we have a motive. So now we are ready to do a tattoo. you know that's the thing. Even urban cities want, like, what they want, like they actually want to know the proof, like, okay, this tattoo exists, now I can get it. This is not an imagination, we have. This is actually authenticated tattoo. We already have like all the motives. And then when we talk about like Apatani tribe, how they get their tattoo, they actually get their tattoo to save themselves being raped. So this is how the tattoo actually involved in their faces, just to look ugly. Can you imagine like somebody getting a tattoo just to look ugly so that they can save being raped by the other people? So yeah, this is how it is. And now it's actually become like, if it's kind of a fashion statement, like people are using in some of the clothes, you know and they are actually using with a proudly, like how our ancestor are, faces all those things, all these terrible things happen with them, and now they are proud of those movement. It's started with a very very regrettable way, but now it's a proud moment to that, you know our ancestors sacrificed these things for us. So this is how happened. Like even in Tharu tribe, we talk about like Tharu tribe now is in Nepal, and they started getting tattoo just to save themselves by the Muslim communities back then, like when it's a kingdom things. So all the Mughal side, they started treating them as a very poor aspect, or just being being raped or just anything. So that's how they started getting a tattoo for their body. So we have a very rich culture, but we don't have a authentication or the documentation. So these are the story when we go to the tribe, when we heard, and when we heard a lot of times, and with a lot of people. That's how you can actually tell this is the, the authentication of the story. This is the truth. That's the only way we know that's the truth, because the community is telling the same story. There is no second story which we heard about the tribe. So that's how, I'm actually documentation with these things, so that eventually people can know about. Like Teresa shows all the documentation about the tribal because she had a lot of books. She had a library to read it. We don't have, and it's a truth. And that's why me and Shomil always struggle, documenting. And we always ask for people, like, whenever you see the tattoo, just send it to us and we'll document it. So that's why it takes time as well. Yeah. So that's
Great
the
cause,
thing.
sir.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir. I would like to ask the next question to it is for Tricia Ellen. Ma'am, in the context of your publication, The Polynesian Tattoo Today, how has the mainstream adoption of Polynesian tattoo motifs impacted the perception of tribal cultures in the urban fashion circles?
That's a difficult question. One would hope that it would have had a very positive effect. And one of my motivations in doing the books is to make the information more accessible, because so much of the original documentation by these ancestors, generations removed, is locked away in museum archives and stuff and not accessible to the people that it belongs to. So that really hasn't happened, though, unfortunately. In some cases, it has, with those people that are of Hawaiian descent and really want to wear Hawaiian tattoos. With the second book, I was hoping that the captions, even though they're brief, might help educate people as to what is Fijian, what is Samoan, what is Tongan, because so much of that has been lost. And again, in many cases, it was lost art for 200 years. In some cases, it was banned by the indigenous people. It wasn't missionaries or outsiders in some cases, like Tahiti. It was the chief Pomare that banned it in 1819. So much has been lost that I find it somewhat unsettling to see this Pan-Polynesian style today um, that's overriding and becomes so much more pervasive than the traditional designs. I really enjoy doing traditional work. And I have a client this next week that's doing a very Hawaiian tattoo, and he's a Hawaiian practitioner. But I think it also comes down to the population and the numbers. As I was preparing for this, I was giving a lot of thought to this. And let's see, where's my phone? I've got some numbers here. Only 10% of the population of Hawaii is Native Hawaiian. Let me bring up my numbers. Hawaii's full-time residents is about 1.5 million, 1,400,000. Now, that doesn't include military. We have about 300,000 military here, plus their families. And then tourists. We're getting an average of 9 million tourists per year. So I think here, there's so many external influences that it's a very small number that's sticking to the traditional designs, which is a shame. And of the Native Hawaiian population, 58% live on the continent, don't even live here anymore because of the cost of living. Now, comparing that to the Marshall Islands, we saw their tattoo traditions. Their population is only 62,000. And the Marshallese people are sticking to Marshallese design. We're not finding the sort of innovation and hybridization there that we are here. We're not finding that in Samoa either, or the Marquesas. The Marquesas is really remote. It's hard to get there. There's no offshore reefs. There's no coastal plains. It's mountains that jut straight out of the ocean. So there's no room for airstrips on many of the islands. Very few hotels. So the Marquesas is still probably 90% Marquesan. When I lived there, my longest stay there was 7 months. There were only 22 non-Marquesans on the island. Me, some of the gendarmes, the police, and the French surgeons and doctors. But the Marquesan population today is about 9,500. And their art has stayed very true to Marquesan design. Rapa Nui, Easter Island, their population today is about 8,000. It was about 2,200 when I was first there. And on Rapa Nui, we don't find a lot of changes or hybridization either. It stayed fairly on course and in line with the traditional designs. And it wasn't really until yesterday when I was thinking about this and thinking about your questions, which in a way don't apply to some instances, that it dawned on me that because of the number of people coming through Hawaii and our population, the fact that tourists want tourist tattoos, military want military tattoos. So there's so much more innovation here. And as far as clothing goes, the same thing carries over. We see these crazy hybrids. And hey, I do hybrid and pan-Polynesian designs. In fact, maybe that's appropriate for outsiders. You know, if we're not truly of the blood, should we be wearing those designs to begin with? So people today are thinking about what do they want to symbolize, and then finding a way to do that. But it's unfortunately not a situation where we can say this meant this in ancient times. So you're very lucky in some regions that knowledge is still there, that can still be documented. Whereas here that was lost, 150, 200 years ago. Some of it has been passed down via oral tradition, but a fairly small amount.
Yeah.
It is an honor, ma'am. Thank you so much for sharing us this insightful observation to all of us and to the audience. I would like to now ask, last but not the least, question to Shomil Shah. In your experience, sir, how does the handpoke technique allow for a more intimate and personal connection between the artist, the client, and the cultural narratives embedded in tribal designs?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question, because it's sort of like, what is handpoke tattooing? If you look at the history of tattooing, it's constantly been an evolution. You know, I think as soon as man or human beings figured out that if you take some ink, some skin, and something sharp to pierce that skin with the ink, you can create a permanent mark. So I think, you know, if you look at the kind of old books on tattooing, they started with bone, they started with thorns, you know, they started with flintstones, and then eventually that evolution has continued into sort of modern day tattooing, where we, you know, get industry made needles, which are a lot finer, a lot sharper, to kind of hand tapping. And so hand poke right now, as I would understand it, is quite a modern concept as well, in the sense that, you know, we had machine tattoos, and then, you know, we had a group of tattoo artists who kind of went back to taking the modern day tattoo needles that were used in machines to using them to just poke tattoos by hand. But hand poke in a more historic context is different. You know, it's like looking at the tribes in the Northeast who use the thorns of pomelo, or, you know, the tribes in Kutch who use the thorns of the acacia tree. So I think hand poking itself doesn't necessarily, for me, create a more intimate connection to the culture or the tradition, or rather, it's not the only thing that creates a more intimate connection to the culture. Because I've noticed traditional artists, especially in Kutch and South India, who are still doing the traditional motifs on their clients. They now work with rudimentary machines, kind of machines made with little engraving pens, or machines put together with car batteries and, a sort of dental electric toothbrush. But they're still doing the same motifs. They're still doing the same motifs, the same intent. Um, so for me, I'd say what's more important in connecting to the culture or tradition is the intent. Um, the method, the process is, oftentimes a tool. Oftentimes it is integral to the culture and the tradition. Like, of course, if you take, the sort of the Samoan tattooing, hand tapping is a deep intrinsic part of that. Or the same that's in Southeast Asia with the Philippine tattoos or the Indonesian tattoos. Um, but at the same time, there are artists working in the traditional space and keeping that same intent alive, but they're choosing to work with a machine. Um, so I don't think it really removes that much of a connection from the culture. It becomes a very personal experience. It becomes a very personal choice of the artist and the client, of the person getting the tattoo, of how they decide to get it. Take even someone like Manglabai, who's a traditional Godna artist from MP, who Amit knows really well as well. So since I've known her over the last few years, she's been tattooing with sewing needles, bundles of sewing needles put together. And that's how she learned from her parents. But then when we met and we started talking, and I'm also a tattoo artist, and I showed her my needles, and she's like, "Wow, these are so much finer. Can I try?" So she started working with these modern day tattoo needles, and nowadays she carries around with her a box of needle cartridges, so that when somebody wants something really fine, she uses that. When somebody wants something bolder, she uses her own hand kind of kind of hand bundled sewing needles. So again, that's the beauty of tattooing, is it's in constant evolution.
Exactly. Like changes should be done keeping the cultural appreciation intact. And then that's all right. And after all, the methods really depends on the artist. The artist is the one who's going to do the tattooing. So yeah. Uh, Thank you so much for an insightful, very fascinating, great answer. Uh, and so this brings us to the end of today's session. I thank all the panelists once again for sharing this invaluable perspective on the topic. This is to remind that we are calling for submission on tribal art and tribal representation in art, the details of which can be viewed on www.tellmeyourstory.biz. We will come back to you soon with our next panel discussion on the project. Till then, good night to Tricia ma'am and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you.
You too. Yep.
Thank you, Sarah.
Right.
Thank you so much. Just a minute.
So where are you nowadays, Shomil?